I'll be reading from Hebrews 11, verses 24 through 29 of the New Revised Standard Version. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to share ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered abuse suffered for the Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, unafraid of the king's anger, for he persevered as though he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land, but when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. This is the word of the Lord.
I hear that this month only women are preaching at this church. It's a sign of the kingdom of God breaking in, of course. But I do wonder about Preston. It's a cushy job, fella. But at least I can say, blessed are you among women. It's a joy to have my friend and board member, Dr. Patricia Griffin, here this morning. Grateful that you're here, Dr. Griffin. And also, I'm grateful on behalf of Central Seminary for the new partnership we are enjoying, as Dr. Glower has been offering courses. Isn't he about the best? I can't say I'm sorry. I'm not sure I'm sorry that he is not here to witness my preaching this morning. Hewlett is wonderful. Well, I'm a president who continues to teach. I don't just beg for money, but I do that a lot. And recently I assigned a Doctor of Ministry seminar book entitled How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going. Leading in a liminal season. That's sure to inspire confidence, isn't it? But it actually describes where ministers, the church, society find themselves at this point. We are in an unfamiliar landscape, and sometimes it seems that guidance is elusive. The life of Moses illustrates this kind of unknowing that is an essential part both of leading and following. You know, it takes many mistakes, some anger management, and much deep listening for Moses to become God's liberating instrument. He had his challenges. No Google Maps. It shouldn't have taken 40 years. Just a pillar of fire, a cloud. No Grubhub, just a rather boring diet of manna and quail, at least for a season. He had a weak brother. Remember when Moses was up the mountain, Aaron collects all the gold, they throw it in the fire, and then he says, and out popped this calf. A weak brother and a sister without enough power to help shape some of the journey. He was in the wilderness for the full span of a generation, 40 years. One of the ancient mystics, Gregory of Nyssa, writes in his life of Moses, just when Moses believed he had scaled the heights, a whole new range of mountains rose up before him. His life left a lasting imprint on the life of the covenant people of God. And this time in the wilderness is described later as an idyllic time when the people were most dependent upon God and the relationship was most intimate. Our text in Deuteronomy recounts his death. It's a summative chapter. It winds up the Pentateuch, those early books of Torah, of the law, and it signals a transition to the leadership of Joshua. And the qualities of Moses, almost as in a eulogy, are noted in this chapter. He is a strong leader, vigorous in health, miracle worker, not afraid of Pharaoh, who prevailed with God for the sake of the people. You remember, there is a time when God was not sure. God wanted to continue with the covenant people. And God said to Moses, I'm going to start over with you. And Moses says, oh no, do not do that. Do not forsake your people. And Moses prevails in that. The one who received the law, the one who pointed to righteous and just living. He was a prophet. And Moses is the most mentioned figure from the Old Testament in the New. Yet he did not make it to the land of promise. Whether he views the land from the heights of Mount Nebo or Mount Pisgah, we don't know. But the text says he looked all the way north to the Sea of Galilee, west to the Mediterranean, south to the Negev and the wilderness and the Jordan Valley. Undimmed vision, to be sure. Israel is rather small, you know, if you have been there. He probably could almost see that far. There are actually two different traditions about his death. There's this one in Deuteronomy, and then there's one in Numbers, in that where God explicitly forbids him to enter because his leadership floundered at the wilderness of Zin. Deuteronomy is a little more gentle. He's old, he's full of years, he's buried, we don't know where, and truly no prophet greater than Moses has arisen. Now, Hebrews offers us a further portrait of Moses, a brief narration of the accomplishments of his life set amidst other faithful folk. You know, Hebrews 11 is that great roll call of the saints. And this recital of Moses' faith speaks of perseverance and growth as he trusted God more fully. But always in the back lurks the murder of the Egyptian. He flees to the wilderness. He has an encounter with God that transforms his life, and he becomes the great transitional figure for the pilgrim people. So what about this notion that good leaders never make it to the promised land? Well, I think there's one way to look at this that doesn't just look punitively at Moses. We never arrive, do we? We can always see beyond where we are. When thinking about Brooks Hayes as a bridge, as Little Rock is trying to make its way toward inclusion, the vision was not fully realized and is not yet. A good leader, a good follower can see beyond. There's always more to accomplish. Many must be involved in the ongoing life of the people of God. None is expendable, non-expendable, and every person must sense where he or she resides in the larger story. We all yearn beyond where we are, don't we? While I'm not sure we have a Moses or Miriam among us this morning, there are lessons for making it through the wilderness that remain available to us all. Back to that book with the scary title that I assigned, how to lead when you don't know where you're going. In that text, we can learn some faithful practices that describe leading in a threshold time. As we look at the news, when we can manage to do that on a sustained basis, we know this is a liminal season. It's a threshold time, and there is a great deal of unknowing for us all. The author of this book, Susan Beaumont, says, we have to change our disposition if we would be faithful and move in the right direction. We must move from knowing it all to unknowing, trusting. From advocating to attending, listening. From striving to surrender. And ultimately from deciding to discerning. She's talking about methods that are more humble. They call for exploration. They call for experimentation. They move from telling others what to do toward a communal attentiveness to the nudges of God. As I have witnessed your church in recent years, this seems to be what's going on here. Communal attentiveness to the nudges of God. It's not quick problem solving, which suggests that we know exactly what the problem is. It's more adaptive, and it requires entering the cloud of unknowing. The Cloud of Unknowing is the title of an anonymous work of Christian mysticism in the latter half of the 14th century. We don't know who wrote it. Maybe he or she thought it was a little too risky to add the author's name, but the underlying message of this work suggests that the way to know God is to quit trying out how to figure out God's activities simply by our reason and be courageous enough to enter a realm of unknowing where God will faithfully meet us in humility and in hiddenness. This seems wise when we're not sure how to get to the promised land, are not too sure we would recognize it if we got there. When the cloud shows up in the Bible, God is there. Think of how many clouds come over the Mount of Transfiguration, the tabernacle, the cloud, the overshadowing of Pidskiadso that comes upon Moses along the way. To enter a cloud of unknowing is a faithful, voluntary relinquishment of control. It's a way of saying, oh God, you see things I cannot see, and I entrust my life and my purpose to you. And we know that Moses had this intimate relationship with God. We hear about him meeting with the Holy One of Israel at the tent of meeting in Exodus 33. And one speaks to the other face to face as a friend to a friend. What a marvelous picture of a spiritual friendship. We hear of Moses' intercession for the people and God's positive response in accordance with Moses' request. And we also know of Moses' failures that God redeems. The Hebrews text talks about Moses' ministry for the sake of Christ. Did that jar you in the reading? Moses in the service of Christ? It suggests that the ministry of Christ is larger and longer and broader than the focused revealing of Word become flesh. And that somehow God, who transcends constrictions of human history, can gather up the promise of our lives and redeem them and put them in a larger narrative for God's sake. Moses got angry. He was impatient. He was given to holy whining. "Have you brought us out here to kill us?" he said to God one time. "Do you want it to be said that you got us out of Egypt and you couldn't get us where we were headed?" He argues and whines, and somehow God shapes his leadership with these. Most of us can see and yearn beyond our present horizon. We hear aspirational words of Martin Luther King Jr., who could see, who had a dream beyond his own years. And good leaders are that way, and ordinary folk as well. There's more we want to do, and yet our only assurance is that God will accompany us, even when we don't know where we're going. I love the prayer from Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton. "My Lord God, I don't know where I'm going, but you will never leave me to face my perils alone," Merton writes. So how about you? Many of us are in circumstances that seem fragile. We work with church budgets and we wonder how to sustain or implement the wide vision of ministry. We know that folk aren't as interested in things of church as once they were. Maybe it calls us to a greater sifting and clarifying of what our mission really is. But we can be assured God is before us, beside us, and is our rear guard. That's the picture of the journey, isn't it? Across the wilderness. In these past years as president of Central, there have been many times when I have said, "I'm not sure what to do next. Oh God, what should I do next?" And I would pray the words that we sang earlier in our hymn, "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, in this barren land. I'm weak, but thou art mighty." We must realize ourselves to be pilgrims. There was an early description of the Christian as homo viator, which person on the way. That's who we are, persons on the way, pilgrims looking toward the city not made with human hands. Now, as we continue our slow way across the earth through much unknowing, we can trust God will lead us forward. Not only are we surrounded with the Spirit of God, but we have the people of God with whom to discern our pathway and make our journey. But we see from these texts, life is often an unfinished symphony this side of the veil. Moses saw from afar and was content with being faithful, even if he did not receive what was promised yet. And that's where Hebrews brings it to resolution. Included in the company of God and the companionship of God and God's people remain our deepest joy and our surest hope. And thanks be to God, we can see beyond where we have arrived. Amen.